We are not happy with China. We are not happy with that whole situation.
We have a very different relationship with China today than what we did 10 years ago. We have different leadership in China. It is more assertive.
The nature of the Chinese Communist Party now, I think, has become clear as a result of this coronavirus.
It was making calculated steps to work out how it could emerge from this crisis more successful than anyone else.
There is trouble with the Middle Kingdom. Even before the coronavirus pandemic killed hundreds of thousands of people, crippling economies and destroying lives, the two world superpowers were already openly hostile. You talk about the great strategic competition of our times. What do you mean by that?
China. The Chinese government. Our concern is not the Chinese people. Our concern is about the current government of China and the Chinese Communist Party and the malign influence that they're increasingly exercising in the region and throughout the world.
US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has accused China of exploiting the crisis and laid the blame for the virus squarely at its door.
This is an enormous crisis created by the fact that the Chinese Communist Party reverted to form, reverted to the kinds of disinformation, the kinds of concealment that authoritarian regimes do. The Australians agree with that. You hear the Europeans beginning to say the same thing. I think the whole world is united understanding that China brought this virus to the world.
I think this is a very dangerous situation. I think it will get more dangerous. And this strategic competition between them is now deep-seated across the board. It's about who's got the best system, whether America's system or China's system is the best to handle the virus and the best to succeed in economic terms, in technological terms, in strategic terms. Now, I don't think we're on the verge of war. I don't think we're close to war. But we are clearly going down the path of a very dangerous strategic competition, the end point of which is very hard to predict.
This song, One Sea, broadcast throughout the Philippines, is part of a new face mask diplomacy by China, positioning itself as a PPE saviour. After years of engagement in the Middle East, chasing the dragon in the Pacific is now much harder for the alliance partners.
What happened was that the United States took its eye off Northeast Asia. President Obama was busy in the Middle East, busy in Afghanistan, busy in Iraq, busy with Islamic State.
You know, we've got to remember they were fighting two wars. We can explore the wisdom of that another time, but so there was always going to be it was like a magnet in a bucket of iron filings. It just drew their attention and their resources into that theatre. In a period of 4 years, it roughly took the coalition government writing the Defence White Paper, integrated investment plan. The Chinese in the same period created sand islands in the South China Sea. So, you know, in terms of tempo of action and operation, you know, this is a new contest.
The South China Sea is now one of the most contested waters in the world. 1/3 of all global shipping passes through the South China Sea, and international cables run along the seabed, vital for communication. The need for cooperation between the alliance and like-minded partners in the region is imperative.
I've had the honor of sharing our vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific, a place where sovereign and independent nations with diverse cultures and many different dreams can prosper side by side and thrive in freedom and in peace.
I really think there's been a remarkable shift in the last 3 years under the Trump administration, but it's a bipartisan shift here in Congress that says, you know, Indo-PACOM is where it's at and where it's going to be. That's going to be the priority for decades to come.
But peace is under threat. Within the alliance, there's a growing concern at China's grey zone activities under President Xi Jinping. Reports of local ship sinkings and coercive behaviour onshore.
Obviously, the situation in Hong Kong is the most dramatic example of that. You know, the approach that China takes towards democratic freedoms that, again, I think are the core of our alliance together, that just, again, has created a new moment that we've really got to raise our game.
To push back China's growing influence, the United States leads FONOPS, Freedom of Navigation Operations in the South China Sea. Responsibility for preserving such freedoms in the Pacific falls to the commander of Indo-PACOM, Admiral Philip S. Davidson.
The United States is interested, as I think all the nations on the rim of the South China Sea should be, in a free and open waterway. And I think your takeaway from our activities over the last several weeks is that we're very focused on ensuring that freedom. We do so not only through our routine freedom of navigation operations, but most importantly, our work with our allies and partners in the region.
Just look at what happened late last month. We had HMAS Parramatta operating in close formation with two of our ships going through contested waters, making a statement that the maritime commons, the rules-based order, that matters to U.S., Australia. Frankly, it matters to every country in the region, because that is the engine that has driven the growth and the prosperity and the security of really the entire region. And having the U.S. and Australia out there together, sort of making that statement that this is important to us, that's powerful.
This is not about two destroyers, passing other destroyers in that waterway. This is about the trillions of dollars of goods and financial information, goods that travels by sea, financial information that travels by cables underneath that sea.
Australia supports America's action in the regions, but we're not all the way with the USA. We don't at the moment go into the 12 nautical mile zone of China's reclaimed islands. We are, after all, a smaller regional player with very different views on just how far to push our major trading partner. However, on April 19, it was Australia that took the lead, calling for a full investigation into the origins of the virus, a move that enraged Beijing and unleashed the wolf warriors. The editor of the Chinese Global Times called Australia gum stuck to the bottom of China's shoe. And in Canberra, China's ambassador undiplomatically threatened a punishing boycott of Australian goods and services, from agricultural exports to students. We approached the Chinese embassy for an interview with the ambassador, but did not receive a reply.
We're not a country that wears its flag on its sleeve. We're not a outwardly patriotic country. However, if we're threatened, we're a pretty determined country. And it was I thought, somewhat foolish of the ambassador to speak in the terms he did.
What the Australian government is doing is completely unremarkable. We are standing our ground on our values and the things that we know are always important.
On May 18, China slapped an 80% import tariff on Australian barley. Admiral, Australia appears to be paying economically at the moment for taking a lead on the banning of Huawei or a push for an inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus. What's your message to ordinary Australians?
Well, my message to ordinary Australians is this, the sovereignty of our nations, our ability to choose should be independent of coercion. And sometimes that makes for tough choices. I applaud Australia's leadership on both the issues that you cited, and I know that the United States will be alongside.
The nightmare scenario for Australia, for America, and for their allies is a conflict between the US and China over Taiwan.
The Americans are obliged by, acts of the law in their country to mutually support Taiwan. We aren't. So we've always said you would make independent assessments of the nature of that behaviour. That said, I think China's looking at Taiwan in a very different way after the Hong Kong unrest. But that doesn't mean they won't continue to set the conditions to be able to act militarily if and when they think that might be appropriate. And I have to tell you, every year that goes past, China's modernisation is really significant and effective. I wouldn't like to be an active military planner trying to counter or retake Taiwan under those circumstances. I'm happily retired, Tiki.
The alliance defence strategy is largely conventional. Neither the US nor Australia is looking to deploy US nuclear weapons to Australia. But with the rise of China, some in the strategic community see nuclear deterrence as on the table for discussion, potentially at this year's OSMIN meetings in the United States. Other wargame scenarios explores China's A2AD, Air Access Area Denial, where Chinese missile capability could reach as far as Guam in the Pacific. And yes, some of these scenarios paint a US defeat, and deliberately. This is all about reshaping strategy for the alliance into a nimble, unpredictable force, which also relies on our regional partners.